So who is Elon Musk, really? I mean, beyond all the headlines and the controversy, what's actually driving the guy? Well, for this explainer, we're going to cut through all that noise and hear it directly from the man himself. We've distilled his own words to really understand his journey, his philosophy, and, his pretty wild vision for humanity's future. Okay, let's dive right in.
And we have to start here with this, honestly, kind of mind-blowing prediction. It just perfectly sets the stage for the massive scale he's thinking on. But to get how he arrived at this point, we really need to rewind, like all the way back to the beginning. All right, let's go back. The year is 1995. The internet is this weird, new, kind of clunky thing, and a much younger Elon Musk is staring down a life-altering choice.
So on one hand, you've got this super prestigious PhD program at Stanford, working on cutting-edge tech for electric vehicles. On the other hand, there's this chance to jump in and help build this brand new thing called the internet. He actually asked his professor if he could take a little break for a quarter, just in case this whole internet thing didn't pan out. And his professor just looked at him and said, "This is probably the last conversation we'll have." And yeah, he was right. Musk dropped out to start a company called Zip2.
What's really telling here is just how scrappy those early days were. He and his brother literally couldn't afford an apartment. They slept on a couch in their tiny little office and had to go shower at the local YMCA. And he said his motivation back then wasn't even to build something great. It was just to try and build something that was useful. Well, that useful little company, Zip2, it ended up selling for $300 million. Not bad. His first major success. And his personal take from that sale was a cool $20 million. I mean, at that point, his money problems are solved for life, right? But what he did next, that's the crucial part of the story. Yeah, instead of just cashing out and buying an island or something, he immediately risked everything all over again. He rolled pretty much his entire fortune into his next big idea, a thing called X.com, which would eventually merge with another company and become PayPal. He literally kept all his chips on the table. So after PayPal, he gambled everything again. But this time, he moved from the relatively safe world of software into the brutal, unforgiving reality of hardware. And this move right here led him to the most critical, nail-biting, nerve-wracking period of his entire career.
His new rocket company, SpaceX, was just not working. The first launch failed, the second launch failed, and then the third launch in a row also failed. They were just blowing up.
And as if that wasn't bad enough, at the exact same time, his electric car company Tesla had an absolutely critical financing round completely fall apart. So it was also on the verge of total collapse.
So you gotta picture this. The year is 2008. Both of his life's works, his entire fortune, everything he'd built, was hemorrhaging cash and was literally just weeks away from going completely bankrupt.
And on top of all that pressure, the media was just openly mocking him. As he puts it, they just saw him as the internet guy, some fool who got lucky with software and now had no business messing around with rockets and cars.
And this just brilliantly illustrates the absolutely insane turnaround. That fall, with basically no money left in the bank, SpaceX's fourth launch finally worked. But the real miracle came just 3 days before Christmas, when NASA awarded SpaceX this massive, company-saving contract. Then, and you can't make this up, on Christmas Eve at 6 p.m., literally the last possible hour, Tesla's financing finally closed. Both companies were saved from bankruptcy at the very last second.
So, how did he even pull off these supposedly impossible hardware businesses in the first place? Well, he says it all comes down to this core philosophy, a mental model he applies to pretty much everything. He calls it first principles thinking. It's an idea he borrows from physics. And the gist is this: instead of reasoning by analogy, just saying, well, that's how everyone else does it, you break a problem down to its most fundamental, absolute truths, like the rawest of raw materials. And then you build your solution up from there. Okay, so here's the perfect example of how that works. He wanted to know how much should a rocket cost. Instead of looking at past prices, he just asked, what is a rocket literally made of? Aluminum, copper, carbon fiber. He went and calculated the actual cost of those raw materials on the commodities market and realized they only added up to about 2% of a rocket's final sticker price. That meant the other 98% was just inefficiency in manufacturing. And that was the real problem he decided he needed to solve. And it's that exact same problem-solving approach, for better or for worse, that he says is what drove his most recent and, let's face it, most controversial move, buying Twitter, which is now called X. When he was asked why on earth he did it, he used this really strange metaphor from Lord of the Rings. He said Twitter had become worm tongue for the world, and that it was whispering these terrible, untrue things to civilization and causing just immense damage.
So his stated diagnosis was that what he calls a woke mind virus had taken control of the platform, and he felt it was pushing a worldview that he described as nihilistic and anti-civilizational. His stated goal then was to restore what he considers free speech to the global town square.
And believe it or not, all of this, the rockets, the cars, even the social media platform, he says it all ties together into what he calls humanity's main quest, a vision for the future that is frankly both a little terrifying and completely awe-inspiring. So check out his timeline. As we heard at the beginning, he thinks digital superintelligence is arriving basically right now. Then, in about 5 to 6 years, he predicts that apps and operating systems as we know them will be gone, replaced by just talking directly to an AI. And within 30 years, he's aiming for a Mars colony that can sustain itself even if all the ships from Earth just stopped coming.
And this is really why it all matters, because this is where all the pieces of the puzzle connect. SpaceX is about making life multiplanetary, a backup for consciousness. His AI company, xAI, is about building an AI with a rigorous adherence to truth, which he sees as a safety measure. And Neuralink is about upgrading human intelligence so we can keep pace with AI. Ultimately, he says it's all in service of answering the biggest questions out there. Where are all the aliens? And what is the fundamental nature of the universe itself?
Which leaves us with this final and, I think, pretty profound question he asks himself. In a future where our biological intelligence is just a tiny fraction of 1% of all intelligence on Earth, he wonders if his role, if our role, was simply to be a good bootloader for this new digital superintelligence. And that's a question that really makes you stop and think, what comes next?